Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where in the world you're joining us for this session, Deployment and Governance of Teams for Education. My name is Jethro Sagers. I'm a senior program manager in the Microsoft Teams engineering team dedicated to education. If you want to reach out to me on social media, feel free to use my Twitter handle at @YesSagers, and feel free to ask me any questions, give me feedback, any solutions, any questions you might have related to your organization. Feel free to ping me through Twitter. In this session, we're going to talk about Microsoft Teams for Education and specifically how to help with the deployment and governance within your organization. So we are going to start first with a little bit of an insight in what Teams for Education actually is. We all know Microsoft Teams, but how does it actually play within the education space? And the next step, we're really going to look at the deployment. What do you need to know before you can deploy it in your organization? What are the different deployment steps? And how do you know that you have a successful deployment once you've gone through all these steps? After that, we're going to talk a little bit about governance, and governance really looking at the different rules, the settings that you have available to control your Microsoft Teams for Education environment. What are some of the best practices? What are the things you really need to know to make sure that you have a safe environment, especially since we're dealing with students, especially since we're dealing with some of very sensitive information, and we want to make sure that the governance and the deployment is done as securely as possible to make sure that you have completely your student safety in mind. And finally, we're going to talk about next steps. What are the things you need to know once you've done the deployment, once you've configured your team's environment to make sure that you have the best practices in place when it comes to governance? So first of all, Microsoft Teams. We know that Microsoft Teams is the hub for teamwork, bringing everything together in a shared workspace where people can chat, call, share files, work with business and education apps, and yes, also host meetings. Teams delivers that unique end-to-end meeting experience that brings back the human element of face-to-face interaction while helping people stay in focus during and after, even after the meeting. And when we say meeting, also think about online classrooms, especially within education. That's a very interesting topic, especially right now with everything that is going on with COVID-19 and the coronavirus and the way that we need to handle it with online lectures. But what is also super important is that Microsoft Teams for Education is a part of Office 365. So it comes with an enterprise-grade security, compliance, and manageability that our education customers expect and value when it comes to Office 365. So that is super important to fully understand that security is one of our cornerstones when it comes to education and when it comes to Teams for Education. So Microsoft Teams for Education, the basic version, the A1, is free for education, right? We can support up to 300 attendees for online meetings, and that also includes cloud recording. So we wanted to make sure that you have, with your basic license, everything that you need to do online classrooms to provide the best education that you can for your students. If you want to go beyond just the academic side, of course, you can also use Teams for your staff and faculty collaboration and coordination, research, and we're going to talk about that a little bit further in our slide deck. Some features are not free, but they are heavily discounted for education, so we can make it available for all our organizations. Think about dial-in voice conferences, very special or very important when you deal with students and parents that potentially live in an area where data connection is difficult. So that's something we wanted to make sure that education had access as well. And of course, support to up to 10,000 attendees for online broadcast. So if you want to reach out from a school district or from a university, the community, you can use live events, for example, to make that happen. Everyone can host a Teams meeting for free. That is essential for us, and that goes for educators, that goes for staff, that goes for students. Again, later on, we're going to talk about governance on who, to control who can create one, who can join one, when they can join it. But it is, as a paramount, very important to understand that we make it available for every single persona in your organization. So whether you're an educator, faculty, staff, whether you're a student, when you're a researcher, this is something super important for us that you know that that is available. So when we think about teams for education, what are some of the big buckets that we feel that teams drives a lot of value, right? So what are the core scenarios when we think about teams for education? And of course, the first thing we're going to point out is faculty and staff coordination. It's very similar to what we're seeing today in the commercial space with remote work. We have administrators in school districts. We have administrators, university and university colleges. They need to work together. They're subject to the same type of rules that our companies, enterprises, and organizations have. So faculty and staff coordination is something that is super important to us, and we want to make sure that even in teams for education, that is fully available in the same way that is available for our commercial, healthcare, and even government setups. Then, of course, teaching and learning. Microsoft Teams has that dedicated environment with assignments, class notebook, that teachers can use this to do both synchronous and asynchronous learning. And so Teams really is that platform that you can use, of course, for online lectures, but even if you want to go asynchronous, that is fully available to you as well. So that's another subject and another bucket that we feel that Teams drives a lot of the value. Professional development. Just like in commercial, but even sometimes more in education, continuously learning is essential. Making sure you stay up to date with the latest technologies, making sure that you have the latest content is essential if we want to drive innovative education. So we need to educate our teachers, our professors, every single day, learning new stuff. And in education, professional development is super important. But what if we could do professional development 24/7 by bringing people who teach the same topics together, whether it's within the organization, whether it's outside of the organization. Using Microsoft Teams, we can bring people together who learn from each other, and we can do this 24/7, not just in professional development days, once a quarter, once every 6 months. We can take that synchronous learning, same thing as what we're doing with teaching and learning, and bring it to an asynchronous model, specifically for professional development. So where we now can educate our teachers on a daily basis, we can actually drive that innovative character of education even more. One that is also super important is student community building. We know in education that when students are a part of a community, they're more successful, they're more engaged, they thrive more in higher education and even in K-12. So we want to make sure that Teams also has a way to help this student community building. There's multiple customers right now who are using Teams to bring student groups together. And think about it. Our students that we have today are going to be our professionals of tomorrow. So if we can learn and teach them skill sets that are associated with Microsoft Teams, they can go to an employer in the next few years and say, look, I've been using Microsoft Teams in my environment, in my student environment, and that is giving me all these additional skill sets that you traditionally will not have with other platforms. And then finally, research and apprenticeships. Um, Within higher education, research is essential. Research is the driver of innovation in higher education. So we want to bring researchers together. We want to make it easier for researchers to work together, but without giving up the security, without giving up compliance, and without giving up that real strength of collaboration that they have internally in their organization. So using guests, using external access, we can make that happen specifically within Teams, and it really drives that added value in higher education to drive research projects together with the faculty staff, teaching and learning, professional development, and student community building. So now that we talked about What is Teams for Education? The next thing that we want to focus on is deployment and governance, right? We know now what Teams involves when it comes to education. Now it's time to really look at the deployment and governance part. And if you really want to read up after the session, if you read the slide deck after this session, feel free to reach out to our documentation pages. So aka.ms Success with Teams really gives you all the necessary steps that you need to make the development and the governance as successful as possible. Okay, so the first thing that is important is starting with deployment. So when we think about deployment, right, keep in mind that Teams is a part of Office 365. So a lot of the things you're going to see are going to rely on specific services in Office 365 and potentially in the whole Microsoft ecosystem. So first of all, we're going to need Azure Active Directory accounts. We're going to need SharePoint Online, Office 365 groups, and Exchange Online. A lot of the functionalities that you see in Teams are going to rely on these services. So having mailboxes enabled, for example, is going to help fully experience the capabilities of Teams, right? Turning one of these services off is going to restrict a lot of the functionalities that you have in Teams. So that is essential, making sure that you have these 4 services fully ready to go enabled. Now, what is also important, and we're going to talk about that later on in the governance part as well, is that you, of course, put in your governance for these services as well. And I will talk about that more in the governance part. But even if you have Google users, even if you have a large Google ecosystem within your organization, even at that point, you can use Google as well in combination with Teams. There's a few limitations, but everything is very well documented on the aka.ms Teams edu Google. It will explain to you how the configuration works when you want to use Google in combination with Teams. It will also explain to you which features are available, which are not, and how you can actually engage the Teams functionality with the Google functionality. And of course, like with everything in Office 365, we need to enable the licenses, right? We have a full documented here on aka.ms quick start edu, but the first thing you need to do is enable licenses, turn on the service for your students, and then assign the licenses so that these services become activated. Now, the next part is also important, is distributing it to clients, to your students. And we put a lot of time and effort in making sure that the functionality is not just available on the Windows desktops. We also support Mac, and we also support Linux if you want to use a desktop version. If neither of these 3 are available to you, keep in mind that we also have a web client, both on Edge, Chrome, Safari, and on Firefox. Our fully the supported web browsers are Edge and Chrome. You will have the same functionality in those 2 browsers as pretty much what you have in the desktops. There's a few things that are different, but you're going to see that the majority of the functionality is available. And of course, we also have the mobile version, both on iOS for iPad and iPhone, and on Android if you have an Android device, or potentially even if you have a Chromebook that you want to use. Getting the client is super easy. You just go to aka.ms get Teams, and depending on your operating system, depending on where you're connecting from, you can download the same client as you want to use on other operating systems. So make sure to pick out the right operating system, make sure to pick out the right clients, and you can actually use all these clients based on your preference. All right. What we're doing a lot within schools is making sure that, especially around classrooms, that teams get automated or that the creation of teams happens in an automated way. And we really want to highlight 3 different platforms that you can use. And after this, I'm going to show you a demo on how you can automate team creation. We're going to focus on the classroom creation because that kind of shows really neatly what we can do from a classroom support perspective. And we're going to focus here on the Graph API in the demo. In the slides, we're going to focus on School Data Sync because those two systems are really something that can be used for a mass automation, right? So let's start with School Data Sync. So School Data Sync is a free platform that you can use as a school, as a university college, to do your class team creations. So it connects your student information system directly with Teams. So that means if you have all your classes, your enrollment available in your student information system, Teams will actually make sure, or School Data Sync will make sure that that information gets replicated into Teams. It keeps the teacher-student relationship in sync, and really cool is the fact that after a semester, you can also archive the classes. So that way, they're not filling up the class environment for the teacher. They're nicely put away in the archive status, and that way a teacher still has access to the content, but they're not a part of their active teams. The most important thing to remember is that this is only for classrooms, right? So this connects your student information with your classes, does not create, for example, an all teacher team or an all Department of Finance team. So this is really designed to support your education model and support your classroom environment. If you need more automation beyond the classroom, that's where the Graph API comes in. And like I said, during the demo, I will show you how the Graph API works. It offers you way more granular control. You're in control of what is created, what type of team is created, who is an owner, who is a member. You can even go as far as saying, I want to create a team with 4 predefined channels. Channel 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to do that for all my teams. You could even take it to the next step where you can say, I even want to have an introduction message available for all my students, all my faculty, all my staff, and you can automate that as well. So I hope that based on the description I just provided, that you feel that this is indeed better for application development. So if you have application developers in your staff and they are comfortable with C Sharp, Node.js, all the different application styles, they can use the Graph API to automate the team creation, whatever team you want, right? So you can, of course, assign owners. You can manage the team lifecycle. And like I said in the beginning, you can interact with chat, channels, thread, and apps. Now, the third one on this slide is PowerShell. And so we have a PowerShell SDK for Microsoft Teams as well. And PowerShell is really something that is used more by IT pros, by people who want to set the governance, the user policies. And we'll show you that in a bit as well, how you can do that when it comes to governance. So really, the creation of the teams, the interaction with teams, that's where School Data Sync and the Graph API comes in. But PowerShell does have the ability to create teams. It is just more in an IT pro kind of fashion. So when we look more in detail with School Data Sync, so like I said in the beginning, School Data Sync synchronizes your student information system, your students, teachers, your roster, and even your school roster, especially in large school districts, is all being synchronized into Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Teams, OneNote, Office 365 groups, and even Microsoft Intune. So what we're doing is really taking that student information data and make that available through creating classes, schools, and users into Azure Active Directory and all the services that you see on the right. We even go as far as creating the users, but also assigning the licenses. So in School Data Sync, you can actually identify what licenses, what type of group should get, whether it's a faculty license, whether it's a student license. So you have that full control. So this is used very much by organizations who want to connect their student information system with the classes that they want to provide in Teams. So School Data Sync has the automated class team creation. How does it work? Well, you go to sds.microsoft.com. It's a dedicated service. You log in with your global administrator. And then we're going to create a profile. And the profile supports two things. You can connect to an API, and we're following the OneRoster API in this case. The OneRoster API is an industry standard that provides information in a certain way, and we're following that same level. Now, if for some reason your school information system does not support the OneRoster API, of course, we also support CSV upload. The second thing you need to do is synchronize your options. You need to identify if your users that you're uploading are already existing users. Potentially you're using AAD Connect to create your users in Azure Active Directory, or if it's brand new users. You can upload the files. You can also identify guardians. And for guardians, we can even say what is their email address, make all that information available. And if you want to have a clear understanding of the different attributes, please go and visit aka.ms/sds CSV attributes, and you will find all the information. After that, we're going to identify the different attributes for the teachers, for the students, and then we're going to customize the activation sync. So that means at that point that you can synchronize even the grades if you're using the gradebook in Microsoft Teams back into your student information system, right? So if you're interested in school data sync, please take a look at the sds.microsoft.com, take a look at your attributes. And if you need help, we have a dedicated deployment support for SDS. So go to aka.ms SDS sign up, and that way you can actually have both deployment support and after deployment support as well. It's an amazing team that helps you with the deployment, helps you making sure that all the data is correct, that all the dots are connected when you want to do that synchronization. All right, in the demo, I'm going to show you a little bit more about the Graph API. So let me load this specific screen. And if you're not familiar with the Graph API, there's a few things you need to know. First of all, the whole Graph API is documented very well on our docs.microsoft.com. So in this case, what you're going to see, we have the 1.0 reference. We have here everything related to education, right? So we have schools, we have classes, we have users. So if we want to create a class, for example, using the Graph API, we can go here, create class. We get all the documentation, for example, which permissions you need to use. So in this case, we need to use eduroster.read.write.all, and we can have a request. So here you have the example code specifically to create a team, a class team. If you want to use HTTP, for example, C#, JavaScript, Object-C, or even Java, you have here an example code. So I'm going to use C#, and I'm going to show you real quick how easy it is to actually create a class team directly from Visual Studio. So let me open my Visual Studio real quick. Here we go. So this is just a regular synchronization job that I've written. And what we're going to do here is we're going to connect to the Graph API. Now, the way that you connect to the Graph API, I will show you that real quick in this one. You need to register your application, of course, to your Azure portal, to your Azure Active Directory. So that's the application I use, the PowerShell application. And what you're going to do here is put in the API permissions. So you see here that I have the eduroster.read.write.all, which is the same as what you saw here. So that's the permission that we've set. So it's an application permission. And what I've also done is make sure that there's an admin consent for Contoso, right? Now, this application comes with a secret. You can kind of look at the secret as your password. So very easy to set up. And what I'm going to do in my Graph API is just here, right, create what we call a client application. It's with the right client ID, with the secret, and the tenant ID. So once I have that, now I've authenticated with the Graph API. and I have here my graph service client. That's the client I'm going to use to talk to the graph API. And very easy, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a class. I am going to add a teacher to that class. I'm going to add a student to that class and finalize that class. Now, these are all functions that I've created, but if I go here into the create class, so let me go to the definition. There we go. Let's open this up, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an education class object. Give it a description, give it a display name, mail nickname, and then I'm just going to use my graph client, which I build up in the main area of the application. I'm just going to say graph client, education, classes. I'm requesting a new one, and here's the object that I want you to create. So very easy to take away all the testing that I've added here. In just 4 or 5 lines, you can actually create a class based on your own information. So if you feel comfortable writing some C# code in this case, it's very easy to create a class. If we take a look, for example, in adding a teacher to that class, it's very similar. So again, have the graph client, education, classes. This is the class ID of the one that we just created, the teachers, and then again, we're going to request and add one. Very easy to do, right? And so when we run this, what is going to happen is, you see here, I've added a teacher, Megan, and I've added a student, Adele. So let me log in as Megan real quick. So Megan now has here this demo class team available. When I click on it, it's going to, there we go. You see that one student is waiting to join because in my environment, I've just added Adele. And what is really cool about the classroom setup is that the teacher now can actually make everything available beforehand. So if I would log in with my student would not see the class just yet. The student would just have their own classes that they're a part of, but a teacher clearly can see it. When a teacher is done, for example, setting up the class notebook, make some assignments, maybe add some additional channels, maybe add an app, like for example, I can add Insights, which is an amazing app, by the way. And if you are familiar with the Graph API, you can even automate this, that the Insights app is being added, right? Well, when we're done, I can click on Activate, and at that point, and only at that point, will the students be added to the environment and will they see the team as well. So this really gives the teacher, the professor, the TA, whoever is the owner of this team, access to all the information that you're going to need, right? And they can prepare for it. And when they're ready to go, they just click on activate, right? So that's the Graph API. One final thing I want to share about the Graph API. Sometimes you want to test things out without necessarily spinning up a Visual Studio project or a Visual Studio solution. This is something that the Graph team has built, which is amazing to test things, is actually the Graph Explorer. So if you're new to the Graph APIs, what you can do here is use a number of what we call example scripts, example queries. So you're going to see here, Microsoft Teams is in here. So if you want to see my join teams, I can just do this, right? Do a get. You see which query is being run. If I see here, I have an error right now because I don't have the permissions just set correctly. So what would have to do here is modify the permissions. And at that point, I can set the right permissions and then I can test. So it's also really good to see based on which query you want to run, if all the permissions are set correctly, if you have a good idea of which permissions you're going to need. Yeah. So Graph API, absolutely check it out if you know your way around writing some code. But that's, for example, next to School Data Sync, how you can customize your teams that are being assigned to people. All right, let's go back to the slide deck. All right. So now that we have an ability to create teams and make sure that the people are part of the right teams, we also need to make sure that Teams is being used according to the rules that you have in your school or in your university, right? Let me give you one example on what I mean by that. A lot of schools do not want students to chat unsupervised. So you have the ability to turn that off for students. While it's turned off for students, you probably do want your faculty and staff, your teachers to communicate internally amongst themselves. So you want to turn on chat. So that's something that is super important that you understand the different rules, the different settings, and how they can help and control your organization. So that's what governance is all about. Setting the right rules, making sure that everybody has as much options to use Teams as possible, but still in a controlled way. And that's exactly what we're going for. And the first one I do want to set up is control who has the ability to create teams. And why is that important? Because as human beings, we have the tendency to lock down to keep maximum control. The amount of customers that I've talked to said, like, nope, we need to have a request form filled in for a team to be created. What is super important is if there's too many hurdles for people to do their job, whether it's they need a team, they want to be able to create it, they will go outside of your organization. They will create shadow IT. So what we want to do is make sure that the right people have the right access to create a team. Like for example, in K-12, I don't think that students should be able to create their teams. But faculty and staff, I suggest that we trust people to create the right teams. Does that mean that we don't need to create rules around it? Absolutely not. So that means that we, of course, are going to make sure there's a life cycle management in place, that there's going to be blocked words in case you don't want every team to be financial team, for example. And so you're in full control of that. So while we're opening it up for all our faculty and staff to create teams, we're still going to set up some of these rules. So what is going to happen when you have a create option is you have this create button available. You can set this. And of course, if you don't have the option here, you're going to not see that button. So even when you want to create a team, it's not going to be a part of that. What is important is that we have a FAQ for the IT Pro governance when it comes to Teams for Education, and it's aka.ms FAQ IT Pro governance. Go and take a look at it. All the most common questions that you will find to how do I control which words can be used? How do I make sure that when a team is not used for 30 days, it's automatically deleted? All these different items are available in those FAQs, and so you can pick that up there. All right, configure user experience using policies. So the control options are available for specific users or groups. So the first thing we need to start doing is defining personas. Who are your students? Who are your teachers? And also you're going to see that with every policy, we have a global policy. Now, why is that important? When you create a new user and you assign a license that allows Microsoft Teams as one of their services, by default, they're going to get the global setting. Now, what we tell as a best practice to all our customers is that for teachers, for students, you assign the global. So that way, when you create a new user, they're always going to be the most restrictive. And if by accident the person that you created is actually a teacher and they should have more options, then you can assign a different policy. But you're never, ever going to be in a situation where students by default get too much permissions, that they're allowed to do things they should not be able to do, right? So that is the first thing we want to call out is assign global to your students, and then finally create a custom policy, which I will show you in the demo as well, specifically for teachers. The second thing is really think about the different policies, and you're going to see that we have a number of policies in place. So Teams, meeting, messaging, live events, app permissions, app setups, and calling. Each of these policies needs to be configured correctly based on your requirements, based on the things you want to do, and how do you want to handle it. And then we're going to assign the policies. Like I said, global is for students. So assign, if you have your students assigned to global, which is by default, you only need to change your teachers and your staff, which is in most cases a lot less users than you normally would have than if you would go and change the students, right? And there's a few options here. You can create a policy package. You can do it in a batch. The most preferred way is group assigned policies. So if you're a member of a specific group, you're going to have access to a certain policy, and then of course package batch as well. So if you have a package, you can batch it specifically to a number of users. Assign your policies to the users in Microsoft Teams, and we also have documentation to keep our students safe while using meetings for distance learning. And I will go in the demo a little bit more in detail specifically around meeting options so that you can see specifically what is going on, how you can set it in such a way that is available, right? I said during the deployment phase that we have PowerShell, and PowerShell is available to set your policies as well. So if you feel comfortable with PowerShell, you can use PowerShell to set your policies. If you're more comfortable with the modern portal, so the admin portal, you're going to see that we have 99% of our settings are now based in the modern portal as well. There's a few settings that you still need to do with PowerShell, but the majority is available in the modern portal. And this is actually a nice overview of everything that is available in the admin center, everything that is available in PowerShell, and what type of policy types that you can do with what functionality, right? All right, time for another demo. So in this demo, what I'm going to do is really give you some insights in how to create a good meeting policy, what is important there, because right now a lot of our schools are actually using online meetings to do their online classrooms, and we want to make sure that these are all set correctly. So I'm going to log in with my administrator, and if you want to go to your Teams admin center, it's actually fairly easy. It's admin.teams.microsoft.com. But if you can't remember it, just go to your portal, so portal.office.com. Go into your admin, then show all, Teams, and that will get you to the same URL. So you're going to see here that you have the Teams policies. Under meetings, you have the meeting policies. Under messaging policies, of course, you have the messaging policies. Under team apps, you have the setup policies. Under voice, you have the voice policies. And here you have the policy packages. These are where all your policies are stored. And under users is where you can identify which policy is assigned to a specific user. So if I go here to Adele, for example, and Adele is one of my students, I can click on her name, and here in the last tab, I can see the policies. I can also see, for example, how the policies are assigned. If it's assigned through a policy package, if it's in this case direct, if it's a part of global, so organization default, or if it's defined by a group membership. You see here that I've assigned some different policies, right? So I'm a little bit violating my own best practice because remember where I said that students should have global and teachers should have a different one. Again, this is a demo purposes, so I'm going to click here on details. And when you see details, right, you can see here where the messaging policy gets their information from. So in this case, it's directly using the students policy, but you can also see, is there one that I've inherited directly from a group, which is not the case, and then your final fallback is your global. So if you would have group membership here available, you would see that the policy inherit from the groups is available here. If you want to learn more, of course, let me open that into a new tab. So you now can see here which policy takes precedence, right? And you can actually have the full documentation. So this is something really cool. You can actually see here based on your policy, what is actually determining this policy, how was set, what was identified, how did we get this, what takes precedence over what, and you have that full information. So that's something really cool to see. Now let me go into the meeting policies real quick, right? And let me go into global. Here we go. And I'm going to go real quick through all the different settings and just highlight a few that are super important when you deal with students. So for example here, those first four, this actually allows students or whoever you assign this to create or schedule meetings. When you're dealing with young kids, let's say first grade, maybe all the way to like 10th grade, we sometimes make exceptions for high school kids, but you want to turn this off, right? The last thing you want is students to create their own meetings. And the reason why, of course, is all about supervised meetings. If meetings are not supervised, kids are more susceptible to cyberbullying, picking on each other, using inappropriate language. So we want to make sure that meetings are supervised and set up correctly. In your audio and video, for students should not be allowed to do cloud recording, not really a need for it. Allow IP video, you want to make sure that this is on. This is actually if you turn this off, that means that students cannot use a video at all. And we did get feedback from our teachers that they love to see their students, see if they're participating in class, that kind of stuff, right? So that's an important one. Content sharing, allow a participant to give or request control. We don't need students to do that. Do we want them to allow PowerPoint sharing, whiteboards? Yes, because sometimes a teacher will ask a student, "Hey, can you share your screen and show me your book report?" Or it's your turn to do a presentation, and they need to be able to share their screen. But they should not be able, and that's the reason why we turned this off, to give permission to another student because that's again something that sets up pretty much for failure, let's call it. Participants and guests. Let anonymous people start a meeting that should be off. If you don't know who they are because they're not authenticated, they should not be starting a meeting. And then specifically for teachers, these two are super important. These are associated with the meeting options. So roles that presenters writes in meetings. So these are who are your presenters. And so we say that the best practice for teachers is organizers only. If you translate that into meeting options, that's only me. So that way, when a teacher comes into the meeting, all the other people, which is in this case the students, will be participants. And participants cannot kick out people, cannot share their screen, cannot mess with the recording. So they're in full control, or teachers then are in full control of their class. That's one. The second thing is automatically admit people. That's actually the meeting option who can bypass the lobby. So what we're doing here is set this to organizer only. This is the bypass only me lobby option, right? And right now you can set this in Modern Portal. Of course, you can do this with PowerShell as well, but this means that every meeting that a teacher is going to create will have the correct, most secure meeting options. Now, what happens with existing meetings? Well, if a teacher never changed the meeting options, we will actually set it to what the policy is. So if they created a meeting that they've never changed the meeting options for, they're good. If the meeting options were saved or changed, we don't feel that we can override this. So it is good to talk to your teachers at that point and say, you might want to make sure that those meeting options are set correctly. All right. So allow bypass or allow dial-in users to bypass the lobby. We want to turn this off as well. Allow meet now in private meetings. We want to turn this off as well. Allow live captions. We want to turn this disabled to the end user can override because then students are allowed to turn on live captions, which is super important for deaf kids or hard of hearing children that can actually then use the closed captions as a way to um, read what the teacher is saying, right? And then allow chat in meetings. We normally turn this on as well because chat in meetings, during a supervised meeting, is where a lot of our teachers um, have the interactions, allow students to ask questions through chat, right? So that's something that is important as well. All right, and so at that point, we can save it. And then finally, if this is a custom policy for your teachers, we want to make sure here that we also do a group assignment. So I can say here, search for a group. So in this case, there we go. I can add this. I can say what rank, and I can select a policy. So I can say, in this case, students, apply, and then every member who is a member of this group will get the policy assigned to them. So this is super important, right? Is going through the meeting policies, going through um, making sure that the right people have the right policies. And again, one thing that is super important is making sure that the global policy is the most restrictive one and is also assigned to all your students. All right, let's go back to our slide deck. We talked about governance, we talked about deployment, we talked about school data sync, we talked about the graph API. What about if you've completely done this? What if you want to learn more? Well, we have a number of good resources that are ready for you to go. If you want to learn more about remote learning and maybe read some of the best practice I've just mentioned, you can go to remote learning, aka.ms Teams EDU Remote. Every month we're doing webinars, both for IT Pro, but also for teachers, so that you can see what are some of the new features that are coming out, how can you use them most efficiently in your organization, in your classes, what are some of the new settings that are being covered as well. And then more from a technical perspective, we also have our technical training available, and you can go there to aka.ms Teams Academy, and that shows you all the information that you need to know. So this is something really important is Teams is continuously evolving, and that's absolutely the case for all the features that we make available for our teachers and our faculty and our staff members from an end user perspective. But more importantly, from an IT pro perspective, that is continuously evolving as well. So we want to make sure that you keep up to date with this, and you definitely want to make sure that you keep up to date with this. So make sure to check out our webinars, make sure to check out our documentation, and really look at all the things you can do right now with Teams, how to make it better, how to configure it better. And so that's kind of the goal of all the documentation I've provided with you as well, is take a look at all these different tools that we have for you and how you can use them better in your organization. So, small recap while you're looking at this final slide. Take a look at School Data Sync, right? If you want to do deployment, School Data Sync, Graph API, PowerShell, super important to take that into consideration. And then mainly from governance, take a look at the governance, go through the different policies, go through the different settings, try to identify which ones make sense for your students, which ones make sense for your teachers. Keep in mind that you can go as granularly as individual settings for individual users. So if you want to, for example, make a separation between different grades or different student types on what type of policies they need, you can absolutely do that. So you can identify, for example, let's take chat as an example, that chat should be not available from grades 1 till grade 8, but then in grade 8, you want to make it available because it's a skill set that needs to be learned by our students. You can absolutely do that. So make sure to go through it, take a look at it. Again, if you're having issues, if it's too complex, let us know. We're always available to help. We want to make sure that you have an environment that is safe, that is secure, that you have all the settings identified based on what you want them to be. So reach out to us when you have issues. We have an amazing support cast to help you with that. And again, if you want to reach out to me on Twitter at Yesayers, it's on the title slide. So feel free to ping me. Happy to help you. I hope this session was useful to you. Again, if you have questions, if you have comments, things that aren't clear, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much.